Afternoon, good evening to everybody today. I appreciate you joining us. As Jackie said, we are kind of really at the tip of looking at what AI can do, especially this new generative AI and what generative AI can do across the enterprise. And one of the areas we see a lot of success, especially in real business value, is in the application development space. And nowadays, by application development, I'm not just talking about applications. I'm talking about platform engineering. All the infrastructure as code operations that a lot of our clients are dealing with now in this digital transformation world. Tools like GitHub Copilot, are really, really important because they can help alleviate some of the tedium that a lot of teams are dealing with, as well as kind of move teams forward and really kind of impact a lot of the metrics like DORA metrics and space metrics that companies are adopting. So I appreciate everybody's time. Like Jackie said, please, post questions in the chat. We're going to have a QA at the end. We'll have the deck available as well, and the recording will go up on our YouTube channel. This webinar today is just the latest in a series of webinars that we've been putting together around Copilot, just in general, Copilot being kind of the major label that that Microsoft has put on generative AI products within their portfolio. So earlier this year, we did Copilot for Microsoft 365. We did Copilot for security, and then today is Copilot, GitHub Copilot. As you can tell, it's sometimes difficult to know where the Copilot goes in their titles. So we're going to get started. So this is me when I look at a client's code base for 2 weeks, and I'm trying to understand the legacy code base. We do a lot of this work with upgrading Java or upgrading React or Angular or doing a lot of upgrades and really kind of looking at a huge code base and really trying to understand. And this is a very applicable picture of me after looking at a piece of code or a repository of code for a long period of time. It's frustrating. My hair's ready to fall out, and I'm ready to call it quits. So what I always try to get myself to is a happy Steve, and a happy Steve is using code assistants like GitHub Copilot. And so, getting to the point of getting through code and whether you're generating code or looking back at legacy code, that's where code assistants can really help. So what is a code assistant? So there's a lot of assistant terms getting thrown around nowadays in the world of generative AI, virtual assistants, etc. So what a code assistant is it's very similar to having like a smart coding partner sitting with you. It's something that's kind of embedded in your text editor or your development team's text editor, and kind of as a pair programmer. I mean, it's a very similar approach to working. You can ask it questions, and we'll do that in the demo. You can ask it natural language questions, and it'll provide insight and information to helping you achieve your coding objectives, whether that's going through legacy code and upgrading, Java or .NET, or even looking at new code, or looking at, an open source project and really wanting to kind of peel the onion on what that open source project does, and more importantly, how it does it. And that's something that what a coding assistant can really help you with. So out of Gartner, they really kind of break it out in a variety of key use cases. So again, generative AI code generation really has the opportunity to revolutionize the software development workflow and the developer experience. So we really need to learn how to capitalize this, and the use cases here are pretty important. So everything from code completion, which has been around a lot in mature development tools, but really kind of taking it to the next level of code completion. Code generation being probably the most important thing that people look at code assistants, is actually giving it a topic and actually having it generate some code. But in general, with these key use cases and the key capabilities, we're really seeing a huge boost in developer productivity, minimizing cognitive load, and really kind of amplifying problem solving, getting your developers away from dealing with a lot of the monotony. And really, they call it monotony, but important monotony, like writing unit tests, being able to write unit tests and getting your code to a point where it's fully covered so you can reduce or eliminate regression problems around legacy code-based changes or even net new code-based changes. So some of the key trends we're seeing in this space are really important. Software as solution vendors are starting to look at code assistants like GitHub Copilot and Copilot Studio, being able to help use these tools to build code within the particular software as a service platform you're using. Salesforce is going to be introducing a lot in that space, SAP as well. And they're going to see a lot of maturity around foundational models. I mean, a lot of the foundational models that are out there have been tailored or fine-tuned for coding specific efforts. And the reason for that is a general purpose model is a little too generic. And so we're going to see the market move towards some of the coding-based large language model foundational models, as well as domain-specific models. So you're going to see coding assistants kind of tie themselves to doing platform-specific code generation. So this is kind of an overview of what they can do and what their key capabilities are and some of the market trends we're seeing in the AI code assistant space. So like I said a few minutes ago, the real key driver, there's kind of the top 5 key drivers. I mean, a lot of them are pretty obvious. When you boil it down to it, it really comes down to making your developers more efficient, writing better code faster so you can get your customer stakeholders what they want. So we call it the cycle time, or other people call it lead time, which is the time from a customer request to the time when the code is in production on their desk. How can we reduce that cycle time? And then how can we increase the quality? So those are two, albeit somewhat diametrically opposed metrics that we need to manage as development professionals, is how do I get things done faster while still keeping the quality at a very high level? And now with digital transformation and cloud and Kubernetes and all the different cloud native services, we've introduced a whole new level of complexity. So while we have code getting pushed out and we want quality high, we now have a whole new base of services and platforms that we're using. So we've really kind of created this maelstrom of changes that has really kind of made the development job much harder. And that's one of the key drivers to an AI code assistant like GitHub Copilot. Also going with that is labor costs and retention. We want to keep our developers happy. We want to give them the tools. We want them to be able to be content in what they're doing. A lot of developers, don't want to be writing the same boilerplate over and over again. So how can I make that job much more attractive, both for attraction of new talent and more importantly, retaining new talent? Because, once you lose a developer, they have a lot of that value add of the domain, not only your business domain, but your technical domain. And when that leaves, that's a lot of knowledge. So if there's a way that we can help keep that developer happy, that's very important. And that's, for example, one of the reasons why we look at the space metrics, because they do look at things like developer experience. Is the developer happy or not? And how can I tweak those numbers? And that's a direct data point that a tool like GitHub Copilot can help with. And then lastly, it's really just kind of, demand from executives to use large language models. There's obviously kind of this fear of missing out that a lot of CEOs have, and they want to be able to say to their board of directors and their key customers that they're using generative AI just so they say they can, right, wrong, or indifferent. And again, like I said earlier, really one of the biggest success areas we've seen with generative AI is in the application development and infrastructure as code space, because you have testing, you can see the metrics like DORA and space metrics and cycle time and things like that. So you have hard objective data numbers that are missing from a lot of other generative AI solutions. And that's what's important when you look at any generative AI solution. So how does it kind of fit? So I'm going to kind of pick across kind of the agile, infinity that we all work in, create, plan, verify, going into pre-production, release, monitor, and then the whole agile kind of piece. And, where does this kind of fall into play? And where does GitHub Copilot specifically fall into this? So again, the biggest one is around code completion. So developers can use code autocomplete features that are available in their code editors using a tool like GitHub Copilot to really kind of boost the speed which they complete their programming tasks. They literally type in, and you'll see it in GitHub Copilot parlance, they call it ghost text or ghost tags, where I literally just start typing and it actually finishes the question I want to ask, which is really cool. And there's a lot of predictive power into that, not only just in the current code repository that it's looking at, but as well as the rest of the model that the GitHub Copilot's been built on. And you can tailor that model. A lot of conversations I have with clients about AI code completion tools is the challenge around, is my code going out to a third party? Am I introducing third party code into my product? Is there licensing issues and things like that? GitHub Copilot definitely has looked to resolve that, especially with some of the new features that have been announced recently at GitHub Universe. So really the big power with code completion is also relevance and accuracy, making sure that that it's correct, making sure that it's accurate to the job I'm trying to get done. And the big one that we always look at is developer experience and semantic understanding. So using a code assistant tool to look at a large body of legacy code and get a good understanding of it by literally asking GitHub Copilot, what does this do? One of my favorite commands in Copilot is the /explain command. And I literally say /explain, and it takes that piece of code and explains exactly what it does and how it does it. And that's what we'll show in the demo. Now, I do caution a little bit of these different benefits and use cases. I read a recent article about a new term called AI obesity. And the idea of AI obesity is becoming too reliant on AI. And this is a challenge with code assistant tools as well. You need to make sure that, for example, your junior developers are not just looking at what the AI is giving them and just accepting it by default and putting it into your application. There does need to be a little bit of wariness and concern and review of the code that's generated by the code tool before you put it into your product. But all in all, it at least helps you get past the point of not knowing what to do and getting your junior developers kind of scratching their head as they're trying to figure out what to do. So we talked about code understanding, code completion. The big benefit that we see with a lot of clients, especially they're in agile development processes, is unit test generation and just generic documentation of code. Using, one of the biggest banes of any developer's existence is creating unit tests. And we've got, test-driven development where you write the unit test first, then you write the code, or you have unit tests that then very quickly become out of date because they were written several releases ago and they need to be updated. One of our favorite use cases for a tool like GitHub Copilot is around unit test generation. Because it can take a look at the code that's been written and then write a unit test to be able to match towards that. And then it just increases your code coverage. And then again, helping with regression issues and just, ultimately client success, whether it's an internal product or an external product. So I appreciate everybody participating in the poll questions that Jackie's popping up. We'll kind of get to those a little later. We'll look at some of the answers, but how does a AI code assistant work? It's really very similar to what we call a retrieval augmented generation generative AI application. So you have a developer that works in a code editor. Today we're going to be demonstrating using Visual Studio Code, but Copilot works with all the major code editors, the Jetstreams, the Vims actually, and several of the other kind of top-end code editors. And you put in a plugin into that text editor, and that provides the user interface that allows you to kind of work with GitHub Copilot. The code assistant then takes that information, the prompt that you're giving it, as well as additional instructions that you can provide it through kind of systemic instructions that as an enterprise you can give GitHub Copilot, and at a project level you can give GitHub Copilot. It takes that information and then uses that with an AI model. So in the AI model is a mostly cloud-based model. In the case of GitHub Copilot, It's using an instance of LLM called Codex, which was created by OpenAI many years ago. You can use, it uses that model that's been trained on thousands, millions of code repositories. You can tailor in the system prompt is what it's called, as far as what code repositories can and can't not be used. And most recently, GitHub Copilot has announced the support of many other LLMs, not just the Codex LLM from OpenAI, but also Anthropic and even the Llama and other other LLMs that are out there to be able to help this support the coding projects. So the results that kind of we talked about a little bit is it's really a multiplier. It's a force multiplier. You've seen, there's been articles over the years about the 10x developer, the 20x developer, and a lot of that is very subjective ideas. It's about philosophies and approaches and sometimes tools. But really, when it comes down to an AI code assistant, it really is that X times multiplier for all developers on your team. It helps bring your junior developers up. It helps your more senior developers kind of work towards newer code. So it really kind of it's the tide that raises all boats, so to speak. And I would imagine, and there's a recent front-end development survey that came out earlier this week that showed there's a lot of AI code assistants being used. And like other shadow AI, I would imagine you have some shadow AI as well around your AI code assistants. What we're seeing is by 2028, a combination of a human, and we do see this as an augmentation, not a replacement, is these working in tandem is going to reduce the time to complete coding tasks. That cycle time we talked about at the beginning of the presentation is going to reduce that by 30%. And that's real hard data. Being able to get your cycle time down by 30% is important. And then also looking at other key indicators like yes, it's getting done fast, but is it good? Is it passing all the tests? Are my clients happy? Are my customers happy? That's where some of the data efforts that's going into future versions of GitHub Copilot is really going to excel. It's going to be able to give application development managers a dashboard to see how many people are using it, why are they using it, how are they using it, and what is it directly affecting as far as their performance and their productivity. We see 63% of organizations are currently piloting it. And again, of that 68%, about half of those are seeing enhanced productivity, and a third of that is seeing this as a truly as a game changer. And I would agree with that. As I've been amazed with the use of a coding assistant in client work myself. Obviously, I can't use client work today. I'm going to be using a very basic web application. But especially when you have a legacy code base and you pull that into GitHub Copilot, for example, and you ask it, what exactly is this piece of code doing? It really helps you kind of deep dive into the specifics of what that code is doing and provides you with that information pretty quickly. And as I said earlier, the ROI metrics focus predominantly on cost reduction, but there's a lot that's kind of that, the iceberg, and I've got a diagram later about, what's under the water. There's a really, not just the productivity aspect of it, but keeping your developers happy. They're not dealing with a lot of boilerplate code, and really looking at the quantifiable business outcomes. You want to look at using a coding assistant with your metrics like DORA and SPACE. And what it all comes down to, which we all deal with as application development managers, is reducing risk management. How do I get the risk of changing an existing application? How do I remove the risk of changing code but while it goes through the different stages and lands into production? How do I minimize regression problems? How do I minimize new feature failing once it goes into production? And that's really one of the key drivers of tools like this. So overall, all that what I said just previously in those previous slides really comes down to going back to when ChatGPT blew up many years ago, or 2 years ago now. Everybody talked about everybody's gonna lose their job when recent tools came out like Cursor and Devon and some other AI code generation tools and things you see on Instagram where people are going to ChatGPT and writing apps right off of ChatGPT. while possible at an enterprise level, I really don't see that the demise of the software engineer is going to be anywhere in the near future. It's not going to be a replacement. It's going to be an augmentation. It's going to be like manufacturing with robots nowadays that we saw in the 70s and 80s, and now manufacturing is a lot more efficient because of the use of robots. The same is true. We're early stages. Don't get me wrong. We're still early stages with AI code assistants. But I think when it comes down to AI, kind of the rumor of the demise of software engineers is going to be greatly exaggerated. The other issue is I think what you're going to see is just that natural productivity left of a tool like this is just going to create more work. For us, it's like, accountants didn't go away when Excel spreadsheets came around. There's that productivity paradox issue that you see with tools like this. So really in the short term, we see AI tools augmenting specific development tasks, and they're usually fairly modest and unevenly distributed, meaning you're going to see maybe your junior developer in the short term seeing a bigger hit on productivity, positive hit on productivity in the short term versus a more senior developer. In the medium term, in the next 12 to 18 months, I think you're going to see a change in AI in general, and we're going to see it in code assistance as well, and that's the use of agentic tools. And that's where we're going to see, coding agents actually being able to break down a complex problem into discrete subtasks and then fully automate that. And then really the software engineer just being kind of an orchestrator of those agents, and then putting that code into production. And then long term, it's going to be like what I just mentioned earlier about accountants in Excel. I think it's going to happen is with the addition of AI in our tool set, it's just going to increase the demand for more complex, innovative software. It's going to now we've got cloud and Kubernetes and all the platform engineering and third-party APIs that we need to consume. AI tools is just going to allow for even more complex solutions to come down the pipe that wouldn't necessarily be possible with a general purpose application development team. So there are some challenges and considerations. So like I mentioned earlier, AI obesity, over reliance on AI is something that you should be cautious with, especially with a junior developer. You don't want them to just take the code and copy and paste it in. That's what we used to call the Stack Overflow effect. You'd have a junior developer go into Stack Overflow, take that code, paste it in, and it was gold. And you still have that problem when it comes to other AI coding tools. Secondly, security concerns. And this is a big key thing when you look at implementing things. We have a framework called the Intelligent Adoption Framework. And when we go through that evolve and the evolve and align phase, we really want to look at what is the model being trained on, and are we having any kind of challenges with that? For example, are we in a highly regulated business that allows us to, doesn't allow us to use code from third parties? And should we use our own large language model trained on our own source code, which I think will happen in a future version of GitHub Copilot, which you'll be able to train it on your own Azure DevOps or GitHub Enterprise repositories. And then lastly, it's again, like I said, we're still early days, right? So, there's a lot of contextual understanding that still isn't there. These are, in a lot of cases, general purpose large language models that have been trained on thousands, millions of repositories of code. And so they don't have a lot of context. They don't know the business they're dealing in. They don't know they're writing code for a bank and they should really take care in certain transaction types, or they don't know they're working in a HIPAA environment and they need to think about data obfuscation and PII. I think that time will come. I think foundational models will get fine-tuned and those new models will be made available to AI coding assistants so that contextual understanding will come along. But these are some of the major challenges and concerns that should be kept in mind. So looking at the time, I'm going to click through a couple of these slides pretty quickly. So who can use this? Really anybody. Like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to AI coding assistance, and this is just kind of a reference architecture of a typical DevSecOps platform, the blue points all point to the different areas where you can use a tool like GitHub Copilot. Everything from, like we've talked about, writing the actual source code of the application, writing C#, Java, JavaScript, Perl, Python, etc. To writing test cases using Cucumber, or unit tests using Cypress or Jest. And then getting into the quality engineering side. So and application security, being able to take GitHub Copilot to make it more intelligent. And you're seeing this with a new feature of GitHub Copilot, where they've got now extensions where I can call a third-party tool to say, hey, take a look at this code. Is there any CVEs I need to be concerned with? Which would happen normally in your DevSecOps tool chain, but maybe you want to see that happen as early as possible. You want to shift that right to the, shift that left to the developer. You're seeing some of those tools be added to intelligent code assistance. And lastly, and most importantly, where it's most important is where the red arrow is. It's customer feedback. So really, it's a really important area and when it comes to customer feedback. The whole idea of this tool is, like I said earlier, making code faster, better, stronger, and for more complex solutions. So I'm going to skip a couple of these slides to get to the demo, but these will be available in the deck. Again, a lot of this is I've talked about in previous slides. I just want to codify it in this diagram here, which is that traditional, iceberg diagram, where a lot of people see the top, KPIs, faster coding, time savings, cost reduction. That's above the waterline and pretty obvious. But when you get down and where we see when we engage with customers on these tools is really improving developer retention, enhancing developer experience. How do I, make the developer want to continue working and make their job that much easier? And it's interesting how they put it all the way at the bottom of the iceberg here, but ultimately, how do I go to market faster? Which, is all the different KPIs on this particular diagram. So getting to what we're going to talk about today, GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is right now currently the widest used intelligent code assistant. I think it's because of its heritage with GitHub. It used to be GitHub X many years ago, before, right around when Microsoft bought GitHub, it was GitHub X. So it's had a lot of time to mature. It was rebranded to GitHub Copilot, which, everything in Microsoft has a Copilot at the end of it now. And it's really matured along with that, along with kind of the adoption of Microsoft and making it work within the tool sets of the Microsoft toolkit. So the typical Magic Quadrant, I have to put this up. I'm a consultant, so I always have to throw the Magic Quadrant up. It is a leader both in ability to execute as well as the vision it has. And there's, AWS has had some faltering a little bit in their tool sets. Although Amazon Q Developer has gotten pretty strong, it's still not quite there with GitHub Copilot. The other thing, and we won't talk about it today, but the integration of GitHub Copilot into github.com and GitHub Enterprise is also very cool. So you can use tools like GitHub Copilot within a pull request, or I'm sure many of you that have GitHub Enterprise, you go in and you look at an issue and it's pages and pages long. Now with Copilot, you can use GitHub Copilot to summarize that and pull the important information out. So not only is it going to be embedded in a text editor like we're doing today, but you're going to see it across the github.com product suite as well. So, okay, so let's go into the demo, because I know that's what we want to take a look at. So let me stop sharing this. So as I said a little earlier, I'm not able to show really a real customer use case for obvious reasons. So I've got kind of a sample application here. It's and I'm just going to ask those that are on the call with me if you guys are seeing this okay. Are you seeing my code windows all right?
Yes, we see.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because something wasn't looking 100% on my side. So what I have here is a very simple React application. It's a student information system that does, some very basic things, and just to kind of keep things simplified. It's, you can see it's it gives me a student list and allows me to create a student here, and I can type in, names. I'm going to say Steve Daly, and I'm going to put in my email address. and I'm going to give it, a role number. And I'm going to click create, and then you can see it then shows up there. So a really basic, Node.js React application is what I'm using. So I'm going to flip over to my code editor. And like I said earlier, this is Visual Studio Code, and I've got the code here on the right side. Everybody's familiar with this. And now what I've got the GitHub, Copilot Assistant plugin inside my tool here. So I've got it here, and we're going to look at two tools today. One is Copilot Chat, and that's the most popular tool everybody's familiar with, and that's what you're seeing here. We'll work with that. We're also going to work with a tool today that's called Edit with Copilot, and this is a new preview tool that was released at GitHub Universe a couple weeks ago, and it's a really interesting tool as far as how it uses context and where you can do things with multiple files at the same time. So it's really interesting as how that works. So let's look at some simple use cases. So the first thing, let's say that I'm new to the team and I want to see what this application is doing. So I'm going to go over here to my source code. I'm going to look at app.js. And here I've got the application, and again, this is overly simplified for in case the demo gremlins hit. That's the other reason why I used a simple example for this demonstration. But I can go over here to GitHub Copilot, and I can just use a lot of different slash commands. So you can see many of them here. So one of the ones I use on a new project is /explain. I want to have GitHub actually explain what this code does. So I'm going to say GitHub explain. And it's going to say here, you can see how quickly it generated the information. And again, it's overly simple, but it says, the code provided defines a functional component in JavaScript using React, yada, yada, yada. But then it gets into the specifics of this particular tool. So it tells me within the app component, the return statement specifies the JSX that should be rendered to the document object model. And then it gives me, links to those files. So it says, it's using student and create student. So it's pulled those into the response. So it's actually saying, it contains two custom components. So here's student list and create student. So I can click on those links and it opens up student list in context. And then I can do the same thing here. I can say explain. And it's going to go through the process and look at what this does. And it's going to say this is a functional component named student list. It's responsible for fetching and displaying a list of students. So you can see it's really intelligent as far as what it's using. Again, it's using a simple application. It's using a general purpose large language model, but this can be tailored so you can provide more context through what are called Copilot instructions. But it gives me a good description of what the actual code is doing, and tells me about what it's returning and things like that. So it's a great kind of overview and allows me to get started with the code first. So I'm going to take a look at let's see, I'm going to look at my UI here, and I looked at the UI, and I'm just going to make a simple change. I don't have a header on this application that shows what this application is, so I want to add a header. So inside of Copilot, what you can do is, inside my editor, you can just, if I hit return and I hit, you can see right here, it says student list. It can say, here's the idea of creating some documentation. I hit // and it gives me a documentation string already, that's used from the code that I generated. So it says this code renders the student list and creates student list components. But I actually want to have it add a header tag. So you can see GitHub Copilot has added the student list component. So I'm going to just hit the tab key, save that. It's going to compile it. And then if I go back over, you can see here it now has student list. Still doesn't look great. So I want to give it some more information. So I want to go over here to chat. And I want to first, I want to clear this chat just so it sees what I'm doing. And I want to say, let's see, I want to add Bootstrap. So this is a very, natural language process query or prompt that I'm going to give it. And so it's told me here how to add Bootstrap. So it literally gives me the instructions, the steps to follow, and it provides controls that allows me to do it. So here I can say install Bootstrap. I click on the terminal icon and it'll insert it in the terminal and install Bootstrap. I've already done that for the instance, for time reasons. I've already done that. But here it says import Bootstrap CSS to the app.js file. So here it shows me an example. And I can click this icon right here, and it'll actually make the code block changes to to the code for me automatically. So it's highlighted here in green, and this allows me to review it and accept it. So I can see it's in green, and here at the top, I can accept or discard the changes, or I can show changes. I'm going to accept these changes. So now it's going to, it's added Bootstrap, it's recompiled. Let's see, it looks like I might have had a bug here. Nope, it looks like good. So now if I flip back over to my React app and refresh, it doesn't have, again, my demo gremlins have shown. So it looks like it's partially implemented because it's got some of the CSS, but it's not floated things into a container. But it does have the code there onto the, I'd probably have to restart React in order for that code to take place. But it's added Bootstrap to my code. It's created, it's added the class container. It's added the my4 on the class name to the student list. So you can see I've actually used Copilot to edit the code here. So the next thing I want to do is, let's see here. Let's go to, I want to add, oh, that's one thing I forgot to do. I forgot to save it. That's why I didn't do it. There we go. So the next thing I'm going to do is right now, when I add a student, I only have name, email, and their roster number, but I want to capture the date of birth. So in order to do this, I want to do multiple changes to multiple files. So I want to go back to Copilot's chat here, and I'm going to use this new tool called Edit with Copilot. So in order to do this, I know I'm going to have to change a couple different components. I'm going to have to add a new input field. I'm going to have to change the API so that it can accept that data to my database. So I'm going to say, let's see, add a new input field for date of birth. And creating a student. Add the date of birth to the student list. If I hit enter, it's going to go through, and it's actually going through the context of my project, and it's generating code. And I don't know if you can notice it here, but here you can see it's found the different files that need to be changed. So and it adds them to the context here. It shows me here that it's changed the create student file and the student list file. And you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, it's put them up in open editor so I can review the new code. So I'm going to go to the create student tab first. And I want to see what it does. I'm going to minimize my chat window here a little bit. But here I can see that it's made these certain changes here. So it's added a date of birth into state. It's added, it's changed the information here on the new student. It's changed the form fields. It's added a set date of birth, so it shows up as null. And then down here in the form, you can see that it's added the date of birth label. And it's added an input type. It knows it's the type of date because I said date of birth. It's created the onChange function to be able to do the set of date of birth. And so it's good to go. So now I've basically created a new set of forms and fields so that I can capture date of birth. And then in student list, I can see that I'm now pulling back the date of birth. So I'm adding a date of birth label, and I'm adding the date of birth to the page when it's rendered. So I hit that, and then I go back to create React app. And now you can see it's showing my date of birth here. And since these records don't have it, it just defaulted on some, standard dates. And now you can see I have a date of birth field here where I can select the date of birth and then create that student as needed. So those are some really basic ideas of where you can use GitHub Chat and GitHub Edit within Visual Studio Code. So that's kind of, like I said, a 101 kind of idea. Happy to meet with people and kind of take a look at how your code would work inside of Copilot, because it's really interesting once you get a really complex amount of code into GitHub Copilot and kind of let it do its thing. So let's flip back to our presentation here so we have time for questions. So let's talk a little bit about strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and cautions, really. So GitHub Copilot it has very strong overall viability. I think there's a lot of different. We actually did a study for another client where we looked at a variety of different code assistants out there. We see GitHub Copilot as a very strong tool. It's got Microsoft behind it, obviously. They've got a good ability to innovate. I've got some new features on the roadmap and a couple slides. And there's plenty of content in the references slide that I have as well, as far as GitHub Universe and what you're going to see in future releases of GitHub Copilot. They have very strong partnerships. GitHub has gone out and looked at creating extensions to GitHub Chat, to where you could integrate things like Sentry, you could integrate security tools. There's talk about integrating ServiceNow and things like that. So you can actually, within that same Copilot chat user interface, you can use that tool to not only generate code, but look at other issues or other data that you might have to be able to write better code within the tool. And as far as market responsiveness, it's Microsoft, right? So they have a lot out there. They've just released a lot on the Reactor channel. If you're not familiar with Microsoft Reactor on YouTube, there's a lot of great technical content. They've just released a lot of good Reactor content around GitHub Copilot and the usage of it, as well as kind of tips and tricks, more of the 301, 401 kind of level of content, where today's more 101 level of content. Some of the cautions is it's expensive, relatively expensive. That's why we always look at, you need to look at the return on investment. As with any other generative AI tool, they're somewhat amorphous. In application development, there's a little bit more specificity around the measures that you can use. But you really want to make sure that you look at that, because Microsoft, at least to date, has not really discounted GitHub Copilot. We might see that in the near future. And that is, in this one business model point is actually needs to be revised. It's only available as a software as a solution model. They are looking to potentially change that, because they have a lot of people that use GitHub Enterprise in highly regulated spaces, but they can't use GitHub Copilot in a cloud model. So there might be that. And it does say here that it does not support multiple LLM providers on this slide. That is now changed. And they've opened it up to use Gemini from Google, Anthropic's Claude, and a bunch of other LLMs. So where do we go from here? So like I said earlier, the rumor of the demise of the software engineers is just a rumor. I don't think it's going to happen. Where you go from here is really kind of looking at what you can do as far as piloting a tool like GitHub Copilot, looking at a project and maybe deploying it into a couple teams, and then measuring the usage and more importantly, the results of your development teams that are using the tool. We mentioned a lot of those: Dora, Space, other kind of typical cycle time, defect per line, those kind of things can be adjusted and measured as well. What we saw from the GitHub Copilot roadmap coming out of GitHub Universe 2024, a lot of announcements. One that just came up in the past couple of days, I didn't get a chance to dock on this slide, is they are going to be creating a dashboard to be able to help application development managers and teams understand the usage of GitHub Copilot, so that you can increase the usage as well as see who's using it, how they're using it, why they're using it, and then tie that to your SDLC applications like Jira and ServiceNow, so you can see, is the actual usage of GitHub Copilot really affecting. So you can do a pre and a post to be able to see if the usage is really affecting the quality of your code. Some of the other things, like I mentioned, multi-model support. They're going to be introducing Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini Pro, O1 Preview, O1 Mini. It's just going to allow you to have multiple different models to work with. Add that one with kind of the fourth bullet here, which they call custom instructions. Custom instructions is going to allow you to tailor how GitHub Copilot works within your environment and within a particular project. So you can actually manage the system prompt a little bit more that GitHub uses when it takes the query out to the large language model. So you can actually better tailor, and again, it can be done at a project level, it can be done at an enterprise level. So it really helps tailor how well it responds to the usage. One interesting one is the code review tool. This is something that you'll see in GitHub Enterprise or github.com. When a PR comes in, you can now automate and have GitHub Copilot be a reviewer. So you might have that be your first reviewer in a pull request review before it goes out to other people. There is some discussion as to whether or not it's going to look at existing pull requests and comments from other reviewers and include those reviewers automatically. That would be a really cool idea. So you have the right people that have looked at previous pull requests look at new pull requests. So really using generative AI and understanding of what the history of a development project is to help you going forward. And the biggest one, especially with the sunsetting of a very legacy version of Java, they're really focusing on major upgrade events like the sunsetting. I think it's Java 7 and 8 is getting sunset, and you have to move to Java 20 and 22, and that's a major move. And so what Microsoft is doing is they're actually tailoring a version of the solution that works directly with an upgrade assistant for Java. I'm sure you'll see the same thing with .NET, obviously, and maybe some other framework upgrades in the future. So some resources to leave you with is the GitHub product information page, obviously. And then I brought up the two recent keynotes that took place at Universe. That's the bullet number 3 and bullet number 4. And then the second bullet is their responsible AI approach, and a lot of good resources there. So you understand how the models work and how they tie back to Microsoft's responsible AI principles. And so a lot of good resources there to be able to help with that. So what I'd like to do now is kind of open it up to Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll take them from there.
Yep, the Q&A is open, so please drop in any questions that you can think of.
So while we're waiting for the questions to kind of go to some of the polls, it's great to see this. So some of the polls, what level of trust do you have? It's great to see everybody is kind of falls in the sometimes review low trust to always review no trust. Again, it's a tool that's been, it's not your code it's been built on. It's doing the best you can. You still have the idea of hallucinations that can creep in. So you definitely want to go with the always review no trust. One thing that you didn't see in the demo is Visual Studio Code does the same thing that Word does with Copilot for Microsoft 365, or more importantly, Outlook. If you use Copilot in Outlook to generate a message and you send it, it pops a message and says, are you really sure generative AI created this email message? You really want to see it or send it? And it allows that review step. You want to do the same thing with source code. And so Visual Studio Code actually prompts the developer to say, are you sure you want to do that? Looking at the programming languages, very interesting. We have a lot of Java and a lot of Python and C#, and nobody responded JavaScript or TypeScript. That's really interesting because we usually see kind of an uptick in the JavaScript and TypeScript with React in the front end, React and Angular, and of course still a lot of Node in the back end. Very interesting to see a lot of Python there because that's a big move, obviously, in the application development space. Looks like a lot of you guys are already using it. Either right now, let's see, pilot and already using is well into the almost 70% of you already using or piloting it. So again, today's webinar was definitely a 101. If you'd like to deep dive more into kind of a deeper look into it, you can scan the code here, and we'll be happy to stand up a better environment with a bigger, more strong project, so you can actually see some of the heavy lifting it can do. Again, for obvious IP reasons, and just the demo gremlins always come and get you when you use a big project with this. But when I have people on a webinar, so definitely we can help with your consideration or your implementation of GitHub Studio and Microsoft Copilot GitHub. So along with that, I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a process that we've built. It's kind of a collaboration with the technology, our digital, and our organizational change management teams, where we've developed something we call the intelligent adoption framework, where we walk organizations through really any generative AI project. We've had a lot of experiences using the intelligent adoption framework with Copilot for Microsoft 365. We've done it with bespoke generative AI solutions as well. And really the key point of that is walking your stakeholder team through the process of envisioning how generative AI can really help their jobs that need to be done, and not just looking at it as a toy, but really kind of understanding what it can do. Going to an alignment phase where we kind of take the imagination and realization and we kind of slam them all together, and we look at what are some foundational problems that the organization has before we go through a generative AI project, like data security and IP issues and things like that. And then the rest of the intelligent adoption framework is kind of based on, agile process, which is let's launch a test and then let's evolve. So let's look at the feedback. How do we get the feedback loop coming back in, and further define what the generative AI project needs to look like going forward. So
Excellent. Yeah. We do have some questions, so we'll pop over to the Q&A quick. Jess has asked us, is the PR review for GitHub only, or will it be available for Azure DevOps repositories?
That's a great question. I had a client ask me this question, like, what is going to happen to Azure DevOps? I don't know, Jess. I'm still and I'm going to Ignite in a couple weeks, and that's going to be one of my conversations, because we have a lot of organizations that moved into Azure DevOps and use Azure DevOps repositories, but there's an obvious overlap with GitHub Enterprise and GitHub Actions. And so what, if any, kind of integration is going to happen there? So really, I can't really answer that question yet, because I'm not sure. Right now, the answer would be no, but I think you're going to see pull reviews be some of the pull review functionality that happens on GitHub Enterprise. You might see come into the GitHub Copilot plugin that's within text editors. So you might see that. So you'll see it come off the main site into the plugin. I've not seen that yet. I've just heard conversations around that to be able to do PRs. I mean, obviously, GitHub kind of pushes the whole PR process onto GitHub Enterprise and github.com. But unfortunately, I can't really answer that question. But we'll be having a kind of a post-Ignite article going up on our blog, and I'll make sure to address that in that blog article.
Excellent. A next question from Benjamin is, Copilot Enterprise worth the additional expense over Copilot Business?
Another good question. I'm not quite sure how. I mean, for testing, I would say no. If you're testing in a pilot, because GitHub Enterprise is more expensive, and you can get a good amount of the usability. And again, I know I used a very basic example today, but Copilot Business will give you a lot of what we did today to at least see if the tool can work within your organization, and if it can address some of the issues that you have right in front of you. GitHub Enterprise, and I didn't have a comparison chart. I think that if you look at the main landing page, you can see a comparison chart with features. But I think if you're looking at piloting it, definitely you're fine with Copilot Business before you go to GitHub Enterprise.
Excellent. Last question that's posted. So we do have a little more time if you wanted to post another question. But this last one is about, what techniques have you used to drive usage of Copilot across the organization and increase adoption over time? And I'm guessing we'll start with just GitHub, and then that can be very vague, right? We have lots of tools in the Copilot stable.
Right. So it's interesting. I think what it really comes down to is looking at what do you want to measure with that. So for example, I have one client that really had a challenge with code coverage. Their code coverage was hovering around 60%, and no matter how hard they tried, beat them with a stick, don't feed them for days, their developers weren't doing it. Once they showed them how GitHub Copilot can help that and help the regression problems and getting the 2 a.m. phone calls when whether a test breaks in the pipeline or a user calls up and says something doesn't work, you directly affect that, right? You just say, listen, if you use this tool, it's going to help adopt that. That's still a very subjective measure. What I look to, but with code coverage, if you can say, we need to get code coverage up, and whether it's you gamify it or you provide some incentive to say, if we can increase code coverage by 10 points, you get a widescreen monitor. Who knows how you want to set it, but that's one way to do it. NPS scores as well from your customer, going all the way out to the edge where your customer is. Are they seeing an impact? Has a very big weight to it, because the customers feel like the code is better, and they're getting things done faster, and they're not having one change break another feature and things like that. So really, it just comes back to, and then another one is honestly, it's community, getting the community to talk about, hey, this tool is great, it helped me do this faster, and kind of that water cooler, or nowadays the virtual water cooler on Zoom or on Teams, of, hey, this tool really helped me. It helped me, I got a ticket and I need to look at code that was 5 years old. GitHub Copilot helped me understand what the code was doing. And maybe didn't answer every question, but if it gets you, instead of starting from 1st and 10, you're 2nd and 2 or 2nd and 1, using a football analogy, Copilot, that's a big benefit. So I think a lot of it is that community build of, getting a champion to be able to tell stories, to be able to get tickets done faster. I mean, that's another big one. If you have especially a bug ticket coming in where your feature development halts because you have a P1 bug ticket, that's something that can definitely help drive, the usage of GitHub Copilot. So one thing, somebody asked internally here, what are the top 3 things from GitHub that make me a happy Steve? The happy Steve is when I get, obviously being a consultant, we look at, clients' code, they give us code, and with GitHub Copilot, I don't have to spend a lot of time with developers really peeling the onion on what the code does. GitHub Copilot does allow me to do that. And of course, we check to make sure we can legally do it and all the rest when we engage, but it really helps me get a good understanding of what the code does. So me and my team can go in and go right to what the problem is. So we don't have to deal with kind of the boilerplate idea of what does this do generally. It's more around, what can be done, what does this application do, and how can I get to the actual ask right now? So.
Excellent. And we do like to have a happy Steve, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps everything up. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing all this, and putting that demo together. I've really enjoyed seeing things in action, and I'm sure the rest of the audience did as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's attending. We'll get the recording out to you shortly, and of course, please feel free at any time to use either one of these QR codes that are up on the screen to reach out to us. We'll be happy to set up some time to do a very personalized lab with you. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.